Energy costs are higher than ever, so today I'm going to give you my top 20 tips and tricks to help you reduce your energy usage and to save you money, including some which I guarantee you've never heard of before. The cost of energy, whether it be gas or electricity, is higher now than ever before, and it doesn't look to me like that's going to change very much in the near future. So unless you want to waste money, it's more important than ever to use energy as economically as possible. So today I'm going to be giving you my top 20 tips on saving energy around the house and showing you some of the areas where you could be losing heat and energy around the house using my thermal imaging camera here, and finish up with one of my favourite tricks to save money when you're cooking. So we've got three categories to look at. Firstly, energy coming into the house that tends to form heat and hot water. Secondly, energy loss from the house in the form of insulation, gaps and sills. And thirdly, the things that we do in the house like laundry, cooking and of course general living. So we've got a lot to get through, so let's start with the energy coming into the house and see where we can save some money. Central heating that heats our radiators and then heats up our homes is one of the biggest energy spends that we have in an average household. So it's important that the radiators are being used as efficiently as possible. And although they're called radiators, most of the heat doesn't actually get radiated out. It works on convection, and that's cold air going into the bottom and then hot air coming out this grill at the top. So it's important that this top isn't covered in any way, for instance with clothes, just to help that circulation. And also, if you've got furniture that backs up onto a radiator, either move it somewhere else around the room, and if you can't, then at least just pull it out a few inches so you've got more airflow around the radiator. It's really going to help. And if you haven't already got thermostatic radiator valves fitted, I would highly suggest fitting them. These will automatically control the temperature in an individual room and can save up to 40% on your energy consumption. And you find every central heating system naturally tends to pump small bubbles of air around the water in the system that tend to accumulate in the radiators with nowhere to go. So in time, the top of the radiator tends to get filled with air, with water only maybe being half or 2/3 full, which isn't an efficient way of using a radiator. This is where we have to bleed the radiator, and that means taking out the air at the top. And it's very simple, I'll show you how. This is the bleed point on this radiator, and this one could be used with either a flathead screwdriver or a radiator key. So let's get a cloth and bleed this radiator. So I'm just going to use a paper towel to catch any water that will naturally come out. And I'm just using a radiator key, although, as I said, I could use a screwdriver on this. And I've not done this on this radiator for some time, so let's see if there's any air in the system. No, that's water coming out immediately. So there's absolutely no air in this system at all, which means it's full of water and it's going to be working as efficiently as possible. If you do find that there's air whistling out, don't panic. Sometimes it can take 20 or 30 seconds, depending on how much air you've got in your radiator. As soon as you see water coming out, just tighten it up and then it'll be working as well as it can be. And tip number 4 is to review the temperature you're trying to heat your house to. I've got mine set for 22 here. If I reduce it to 21, that's a 5% saving in my central heating costs. And you may find no one in the household even notices, and if they do, maybe they just need to wear an extra jumper. And the last tip while we're talking about radiators is, if you've got rooms like this one that you're not using, then just turn the central heating off. So let's move on to the heart of the central heating system, which is the boiler and the controller. And programming the controller properly can save you an enormous amount of energy throughout those long winter months. And if you put this on, so it turns the heating on 30 minutes before everyone gets up in the morning, it's really going to make it easier for the whole household to get going. Programming it properly will mean that your house is comfortable when you're in and you're not wasting energy when you're out. Double check the temperature that you're setting your water at. And if you've got a combi boiler or a massive great big tank like this just for 2 of you, there is no point in heating up the water any hotter than the hottest you're ever going to need it around the house. You'd just be wasting money. And in my household, I know exactly what that is, and that's my wife's shower. So my recommendation is to keep nudging it down. Don't go beyond 50 degrees, because less than that things can start growing. Keep nudging it down until someone complains or something stops working, then you can just turn it up a little bit. I've just adjusted mine. If I've gone too far, I think I'll probably find out pretty soon. Tips 8 and 9 are to do with your boiler, and this is where the fuel that comes into your house gets converted into heat. More often than not in the UK, that would be natural gas. And the efficiency of what happens in this box can make a big difference to your yearly bills. To work at their best, boilers need to be serviced regularly, which means that they're not only going to be working as efficiently as possible, but on the safety side, it means someone's checked them out and they're safe to be around. So at number 9, not all boilers are equal. Just like cars, new cars are more efficient than old cars. And for instance, this is a relatively new boiler. It doesn't have a pilot light, it has electronic ignition. That means that gas isn't running through this 12 months of the year. And also, unlike the old boilers, this isn't just on or off. There's a whole range of settings depending on the situation. So if your boiler is over 10 years old, by replacing it with an A-rated new boiler, you can easily save £350 a year just because a new one is working so much more efficiently. Which brings me on nicely to this video's sponsor, who is iHeat. Now iHeat are an online company that make it as easy as possible to replace your old or broken boiler. And they not only make it easy, but they can install it next day, which is like tomorrow, which to me is just bizarre. Everything is on their website and they can install next day because they're nationwide, and they cut out the on-site survey, which traditionally you need to wait for a heating engineer to come round to give you a quote. But instead you run through a list of simple questions about your property, and then you get a fixed price quote, which is, well, fixed even if your gas pipe needs upgrading. So let's try that now. These are all simple questions, and if you have got any doubts, everything's explained underneath. So let's say that mine is on mains gas. I've got a system boiler that comes straight off of the mains as well. I would say my pressure is average, maybe with 3 bedrooms and a couple of bathrooms. It's on the external wall. So after going through these questions, it's actually found some alternatives for me. And the quote tells you exactly what's included, which is essentially everything, plus taking away the old boiler and all the rubbish. There's also 0% finance solutions and like-for-like price match if you find the same thing cheaper anywhere else. And as usual, I've also got a discount code which will save you £50 off anything on the website if you use the code PROPERDIY, or even easier, click on the link in the description below. I'm just in the kitchen here and I'm having a play with my thermal imaging camera, and it's absolutely fascinating. Let's have a quick look round. You'll be surprised at what you can see. Have a look at this. So it's a winter's day and I've got the heating on, but if you actually look at the camera, you can see my underfloor heating that you could never see before. I mean, you know when it warms up, you can feel it on your feet. But the thing that just surprises me is I've got 2 areas here. This one is working pretty well. If I go over to this area, it's not nearly as hot, although the contrast changes. It's not nearly as hot and as defined as that. So I think I need to balance my underfloor heating and see if I can get that sorted out. So that sort of explains why this end of the kitchen is not nearly as hot, but I know I've got an adjustment on the manifold there, so I need to have a look at that. Let's go outside and see what we can see. So nothing that really stands out here. Obviously the windows are warmer than anything else, and the frame's obviously warmer, but there's not much I can do about that. Same here, but nothing's really showing up of concern. One thing I do notice is that vent up there is a lot whiter than the rest of the frame. So it looks like that vent is open. And probably the same on this one as well. Yeah, you can see that vent is white. So that's something I'm going to have a look at when I go inside. And in my boiler room, there's the manifold for the underfloor heating that you can see is showing up as pretty red hot at the moment, including the pipework that is sending water upstairs to the radiators and all these valves as well. The boiler is warm at the top and the pipes coming out of it. Quite fascinating really. But the good news is the water tank here is actually pretty cool. You can see the pipework coming out of it and the odd bolt, but the rest of it is absolutely cool as anything. So the insulation on this is doing quite a nice job. I've got the same underfloor heating here in the lounge, and it's absolutely fascinating that you can actually see the water system and the rings of water going around the room. So that's absolutely fascinating, and it means you can see things that you can't with the naked eye. These thermo imaging cameras aren't cheap, but then they're not that expensive. They start at about £70–80. So if you know someone that's got one, well worth borrowing it from them for a day or so to have a look around your property inside and out to see if you're losing any heat and see if anything needs attending to. And that reminds me, I better go and close that vent. Closing that air vent brings me nicely on to my number 10, which is closing air vents and installing draft excluder. You know, air vents are great at bringing in a little bit of ventilated air. It cuts down on moisture and makes sure that nothing starts growing. But in the middle of winter, when we're trying to keep that heat in the house and trying to keep that energy within the house, they really need to be closed and sealed up. And buying some draft excluder from your DIY shop can really pay dividends by going around and making sure that you haven't got any big gaps between windows and door frames. Along the same lines, at number 11, is just to buy a gun with sealant in and spend half an hour going around your house just making sure any cracks between door frames and windows and walls are sealed up. This is really handy to just make sure that nothing is coming through any gaps or whatever. If it gets too bad and your house is too old and it's got single glazing, you're going to have to think about going to double glazing. It can really save money year after year, but it is quite a big commitment. Obviously all new houses come with double glazing, but if you're in an old one, you really need to be considering whether you need to update and move on to the 21st century. And let's go now to one of my least favourite areas for number 13, up in the loft. Hey, I really need to do some boarding. So why are we up in the loft? Well, at least 30% of all your heat in a house goes through out the roof into the loft. And I know from experience, and having already insulated maybe 3 lofts over the last few years properly, that in my opinion it makes the biggest difference when it comes to insulating your house and keeping the warm air in. The standard now is 200mm or 8 inches of insulation, whereas once upon a time it used to be 4 inches. And these days that just doesn't cut it. And I can tell you from experience that 4 inches or 100mm is just not enough. You're wasting your time. 100mm of insulation in one direction and then 100mm of insulation in perpendicular to that is the bare minimum. And I have to tell you, if you do that properly and upgrade your insulation in your loft, you will notice an immediate difference to the way you heat your house and heat retention in your house. And tip number 14 is the one thing that everyone forgets when they insulate their loft, which is the loft opening. I'm lucky, I've got a new loft opening here, and the board that you see from downstairs is actually insulated. It's very thick and has got a really good seal around the outside. But more often than not, especially on older properties, you might just have a little bit of ply or thin piece of board or MDF. So that really needs to be sealed around the outside and 200mm of insulation on top of it. Even if you just lay it on top, so as you push it up, it all pushes up. It's better than nothing. Don't insulate your loft and spend a fortune and time and money doing this without thinking about your loft hatch. Well, it's nice to get out of the loft and into the utility room. And at number 15, we're talking about laundry. In fact, we're talking about washing at 30 degrees rather than 40 degrees. You see, modern detergents can easily handle washing at 30 degrees. You're not actually going to notice any difference. And modern washing machines actually heat the water in the washing machine. It doesn't come from your hot water system. It comes in cold and then it gets heated. So by cutting down to 30 degrees, not only saves energy and money, but it also speeds up the whole cycle because you're not having to heat so much water. All you have to do is change one of the buttons. It's one of them here, my wife will tell you. After the cycle, when it comes to drying, also the last thing you really want to do if you're trying to save money is to use a tumble dryer. It just burns electricity with trying to heat and get rid of that moisture. It's just best to take it out and let it dry naturally. And at number 17, this is one that I'm sure everyone knows. Appliances like televisions, stereos and chargers, even if they're on standby, still pull some sort of power. So if you're not going to use them, just turn them off. And at number 18, and this is one that my children have heard a few times, rather than boiling a whole kettle, just boil what you need. And the last couple of tips are based on one of my favourite topics, which is food and cooking. And the first one is about defrosting frozen food. You see, so many people use a microwave oven to thaw out frozen food, when actually all they're doing is using energy and spending money. When, with a bit of forward planning, you can get that done free. So all I have to do is work out what I'm going to eat tomorrow night, pop it in the fridge, and that'll be defrosted without spending a penny on it for tomorrow evening. But I might have the pizza actually. So my very last tip is something that I do all the time. You see, I've just put the glaze on the top of my ribs here, and I know that I've got another 10 minutes to cook before they're finished. So what I'm going to do is just turn off the oven now. You see, even though I've turned it off, this is going to retain heat for at least the next 10 minutes. And just to prove to you, I've got a thermometer in here just to see how the temperature goes down in the next 10 minutes. And the way I look at it is that I'm getting the last 10 minutes for free. So there you go, even after the oven being off for 10 minutes, it's still around 160, which is more than enough just to finish off my ribs. Nice. So there you go, some nice ribs, coleslaw, and a nice jacket potato with some real butter as well. I do feel I'm in a bit of a Barry Lewis video though, anyway. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please check out the other ones on the channel. Oh, that smells really good. And go and look at our Patreon page where you see extra content each week. I've got to wrap this up quickly because I can't stand this much longer. I will see you next time.